Thanks very much, Sam, and thanks to all of you for joining us out there. Usually when we do these webinars at Search Institute, I have a role to actually be, in theory, sharing some content and ideas, but today I have the privilege of, in fact, playing Oprah for our really great group of folks who are going to share some thoughts with you on youth voice and out-of-school time. My colleague Jenna Sethi, who's a research associate here at Search Institute, is going to be joining us. Jenna, in addition to her academic work on out-of-school time and youth voice, has worked in and run out-of-school time programs. So she brings the practitioner and the researcher hat to this. Justin Roskopf heads up our survey services here at Search Institute, and one of the things we're going to give you a quick overview of today is a new measurement instrument that we've created to bring youth voice in a different way into the out-of-school time space. And it's going to be interesting to hear an overview from Justin of the Youth and Program Strengths Survey, or the YAPs survey, as we're calling it for short. And then I'm really honored and thrilled to have Justin Boeding with us. He's a pastor at United Lutheran Church of Red Wing, not too far from us in Minneapolis, here in Minnesota. And he is deeply involved in youth initiatives and out-of-school time in his community and church, and actually used a pilot version of the survey we're going to be talking about. And so he will share some thoughts about bringing data to the endeavors that he has got underway in his community. I might just frame our discussion this way briefly by saying my background before I came to Search Institute 2.5 years ago was in K-12 education, and over the course of more than a couple decades as a teacher and administrator, I really lived the journey, for better and worse, that schools have gone through with data. Whereas, where unfortunately too often it's been more a hammer than a flashlight to help educators meet needs of individual young people and then groups of young people. One of the reasons I was interested in coming to Search Institute as an applied research nonprofit is because we certainly work in schools, but we also work beyond them in out-of-school time, families, and communities. And so we really have the opportunity and the challenge of thinking ecologically about kids' lives. And over the last couple years around the country, I've had the opportunity to get to know the out-of-school time world much, much better than I did as a school-focused educator. And it really has been a fantastic experience for me. The commitment and passion that the world beyond schools has got for kids and the really extraordinary things that are being achieved have been inspiring and really have convinced me that breaking beyond the school day and the calendar is critical, imperative. And then one of the other very interesting things that I've observed has been this movement to enhance program quality in the out-of-school time space. And I've gotten to know folks at places like the Weikart Center and elsewhere that have really done exemplary work trying to bring a set of best practices to the out-of-school time world. The thing that has surprised me, though, is that in many, I'm sure not all, of those program settings, there has not been a lot of data shared that captures young people's experience directly in attempting to improve programs and outcomes. There has been extraordinary work to capture the professional judgment and perspective of adults and observers. But one of my questions has been, what about kids' lived experience in the programs? And so that really brought us to this emphasis on youth voice, which is closely tied to, of course, youth leadership. I should add, it's not that my former world of K-12 education does youth voice particularly well either. We have lots of test scores and not a lot of data, so this is thankfully changing, on those attitudes and behaviors that also matter so much to kids' performance in schools. So the subject here today is how can you bring youth voice and data on youth voice to efforts to improve program quality in out-of-school time. Last point that I would make ties to the new research we're doing on developmental relationships at Search Institute. So we'll be releasing a major study of developmental relationships in families in the coming months. And in our view, a developmental relationship is a dynamic mix of 5 actions that happen between a kid and adult or between kids and kids. And those 5 are expressing care, challenging growth, providing support, sharing power, and expanding possibility. And when we look in the research at the outcomes that kids have in school and beyond when they experience these kinds of relationships, it's really quite exciting. But the one point that ties to our subject today is that when we look at the influence of all 5 of those relational strategies, it really seems that sharing power is the secret sauce, that kids who experience relationships in which they feel seen, in which they get to make appropriate, age-appropriate decisions, in which they have a sense of agency, just have outcomes in terms of both attitudes, behaviors, and other outcomes that are off the charts. Now, an important question is, did those kids just kind of come out of the womb perfect and so everyone wants to share power with them? Or is there something causal happening there? When we empower kids, when we give them voice, does it actually change the way they experience life? Our working theory at Search Institute these days is that there's a lot of causation going on there, and that when we take youth voice and youth leadership seriously, it has very positive implications for how kids do in our programs and schools and families and communities. So with that overview, I'm going to turn it over to Jenna, who's going to frame the discussion for us, try and get us on the same page about youth voice, and we will be really interested in your questions and observations over the course of the rest of this webinar. So Jenna.
All right. Thank you, Ken. So what is youth voice? And I think this is kind of a good, simple working definition, but it really has two pieces, and it's about the fact that young people need to have their thoughts and their opinions validated and heard, but they also need to be implemented as part of the program as well. Several youth development scholars talk about the idea that youth voice requires active involvement, particularly in kind of problem-solving experiences. And youth voice is not done alone. It's not in a vacuum. It's actually done in supportive, collaborative relationships with caring adults. And those adults really respect young people's desire to engage in the planning and the execution of new ideas in the programs that they're part of. So essentially, youth voice can happen anywhere authentically, but today we're going to mostly focus on what it can look like in your after-school program.
All right. Thank you, Jenna. At this time, we are going to turn it over to all of you of the audience with a poll. So we can launch the poll. The question is, for those of you joining us on the phone, does your organization incorporate youth voice in the decision-making process? So you just have that definition of youth voice from Jenna to think about. And the options are, yes, we have a procedure to gather youth perspective. Yes, but we could do more, often be more intentional. No, but we'd like to. Or no, we don't see it as necessary for our work. Or no, we do not work directly with you. So those are these 5 options. I see that about half of you have had a chance to vote, so I'll leave it open for a few more seconds. So if you haven't had a chance to make your voice heard, please do. All right, I'm going to be closing the poll now and sharing your results. So it shows that 18% of you said yes, we have procedure to gather youth perspective. 60% said yes, but we could do more often and be more intentional. 18% said no, but we'd like to. Well, thanks for being here. No one sees it as unnecessary for their work. And 5% of you do not work directly with youth. So that's what we have in the audience. So I will hide the poll and turn things back over to Jenna.
Okay, so we talked a little bit about what youth voice is. So why does it matter? And there are really quite a few positive outcomes that come from having youth voice highlighted or really intentionally done in your program. And so I'm going to highlight 5 things today and probably spend the most time on the sense of belonging. The sense of belonging happens in programs when youth develop meaningful relationships with each other, when adults acknowledge and listen respectfully to the ideas of young people, youth feel that they belong. So in our research here at Search on developmental relationships, I'm going to kind of go off of what Ken said earlier, we found that youth and adults sharing power has really been consistently associated with many positive outcomes like emotional competence, motivation to learn. And there's 4 elements to our definition of sharing power. And part of it is respect, that young people feel that they're taken seriously, that they're treated fairly, that there's negotiation in the relationship, that people can ask each other for opinions and consider them for decisions, that there's response in that relationship. So the young person adjusts in their interests or their needs, the adult responds to them, and vice versa. And then finally, there's collaboration. So youth and adults work together to accomplish goals. And we also know, too, that for engaging marginalized youth, particularly in decision-making, there's really a lot of potential to counter negative effects and experiences, and it really contributes to a sense of confidence and belonging in the community. So confidence is part of that as well, and that's really just about developing new skills, having young people really acknowledged in programs and appreciated for their particular talents that they bring to that program. Another important and positive outcome is developing a sense of agency, and there's a few different pieces to this. Part of it is young people having the ability to articulate their views to other people. It's about being able to act and exert influence. It's also about kind of growing a sense of identity as a person who can make change in their program, in their community. And then it's also about developing a greater sense of leadership. And then ownership, we've kind of talked about this, so it's really creating that space where young people can put their input and ideas into the program, because it really gets them involved in sort of because if kids are having fun, if they feel heard, they bring their friends. And programs grow when kids feel that they're heard in those programs. All right. So what is something that we can do, or you can do, to cultivate youth voice in your organization? And this is just a little list of, there's plenty of these, but I picked a few do's and don'ts I thought might be worth highlighting. So the first one is to listen carefully. And this is, even if you're surprised, even if you don't necessarily agree with what you're hearing, find ways to really capture the richness of what young people are saying in your program. One way you can do this and bring some integrity to the process of hearing what they have to say is to ask them questions like, is this what I'm hearing? Or when you talked about having more certain types of activities in the program, can you say more about that? Can you give an example? Because remember, this is really about making the program the best it can be for both youth and adults. So they're going to be very, I think, happy and grateful to have an adult who's willing to really listen to their opinions and take them seriously. Don't be afraid to share your thoughts. Don't be afraid to push back respectfully. Youth voice is not just about young people talking and adults never giving any feedback. So, for example, maybe there's youth in your program that say they really want to take on a new activity, but you know it's not in the budget. So where do you go from there? You could let them know that that budget constraint is there, but could you challenge them to say, hey, maybe we come up with some interesting fundraising solutions and support them if they want to see those things through. Do provide an environment where people feel comfortable sharing. You might find that some young people in your group prefer the one-on-one type of situation. Some might prefer small groups. Some might be okay with being in a large group setting. And also think about that youth from different cultural backgrounds may prefer to contribute in different ways. So think about creating that space where everyone feels willing to share and being kind of cognizant of the differences of the young people in your program. And then finally, don't expect this whole thing to happen overnight if this hasn't been a strong part of the culture or central to the culture of your organization. And that's okay. Just know that it might take some time to build some trust. One of the things we've discovered in our research talking to young people is that they feel that they're told a lot, especially in schools and sometimes in out-of-school time programs, about their opinions, yet things rarely change based on what they've been told on. And so I think they sometimes wonder why anyone asks them if nothing is going to change. So the adult leaders in your organization are really going to have kind of a sustained commitment to a culture of youth voice for it to work out in the long run.
So this is Kent, and let me before we move on, let me ask a question, Jenna. If this is such a beneficial part of an out-of-school time program, meaning engaging youth voice in the way you've described it, why doesn't it happen more often? What's one or two obstacles? I could tell you what they are in schools. I don't think they're adequate reasons not to do it, but what are they in the out-of-school time world?
Yeah, I think it covers both out of school and in school, because I think there's societal barriers. I think there's sometimes the idea that youth are seen as less than, or that they're seen as our future rather than, people that can be agents of change in their community right now. We hear that a lot, right? In a positive way, we say, oh, the youth are our future, but then we sort of relegate them to not being able to take action in the present. So I think that's sort of a societal barrier. I think there's some adult misconceptions that youth are apathetic, that they're lazy, that they may not want to get engaged, or maybe sometimes youth are sort of afraid to share power or kind of unwilling to do that. But we've interviewed a lot of young people, especially in the last couple months, and they've said over and over, they want to be part of making decisions in their community. They want to be engaged. They're willing to work hard. they just really want a chance to do that. So I think a lot of adults need to kind of create those spaces more for young people.
So don't ask and then do nothing.
Yeah.
Sort of a
Good rule of
thumb. Yeah, as somebody who spent my career mostly focused on academic readiness, I guess I would plead guilty to being someone who probably has erred way on the side of approaching young people as always becoming and never being. It's always been sort of, oh my gosh, what are we going to do to get you ready for some kind of college and high school career? And as though they are at 15 or 13 or 8, waking up every morning and as focused as I am on what they'll be like when they're 23, which they're not. So I plead guilty. Thank you, Jenna. Really, really interesting overview. Let me turn it over here, if I've got my cruise director role right, to do a second poll that is going to give us a little more sense of your thoughts on the subject. Sam?
Yeah. Thanks, Ken. Oh, one more thing. Julia from our audience mentioned that we often suffer from adultism. So that was a good way of putting that a lot. So our second poll, I'm launching it right now, is about using any tools to measure the quality of your program currently. So the question being, do you currently use a tool to help measure the quality of your program? The options are yes, we take a qualitative approach through interview or observation. Yes, we take a quantitative approach doing staff or youth surveys. We do a bit of both, is the third option. And the fourth option is we do not have a formal means of measuring program quality. So I'll leave that open. It looks like 60% of you have voted. So if you haven't got your chance to vote yet, please do. And I'm going to close the poll here in a couple of seconds. So, all right, it looks like we have about 80% of the audience has voted. So I'm going to close the poll and share those results. And it looks like 9% of you are currently taking a qualitative approach. 12% take a quantitative approach. 58% do a little bit of both. And 21% don't have a formal means of measuring program quality as of yet. So thank you all for sharing your thoughts. And I'm going to hide our results and turn it back to Justin now.
Great. Hello, everybody. This is Justin, and as Kat mentioned, I'm the Senior Survey Specialist here at Search Institute. So I'm going to take this opportunity now to talk a little bit more around our approach to incorporating youth voice into programs. And at Search Institute, we like to take a mixed methods approach. So we definitely see a role for walkthroughs, observations, as well as collection from staff and youth. But the tool that I'm going to talk about today, which is the Youth and Program Strength Survey, or the YAPs, focuses more on the youth perspective of program quality. So over the years, we've seen that out-of-school time programs can directly impact the development of a youth's character skills. And when I say character skills, it's oftentimes the term that others may use, maybe social-emotional skills, soft skills, life skills, non-cognitive skills. So there's many words for the same thing, but that's what we're getting at. So those programs who target these skills as outcomes see the development of them as important as cognitive ability to the healthy growth of young people. So while we know that some programs can impact these skills and their development, the ability to do so largely depends on the practices of those programs, as well as the experiences of the youth within those programs. In 2002, a committee on community-level programs for youth was formed as part of a project from the National Research Council and the Institute of Medicine. That committee brought together a group of researchers from a diverse number of fields, as well as practitioners, to really get a look at how out-of-school time can promote the positive development of youth. So out of that work, they found that there are 8 elements that are consistently found in high-quality youth programs. And they defined high-quality youth programs as programs that are effective in developing what we listed those on the next slide here. So these are actually the elements of the Youth and Program Strength Survey. So we look at 8 different areas that are consistently found in quality youth programs. I'm going to start from the bottom, actually, of this list, and this is just some sample pilot data. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on that, but I want to definitely talk about each of these 8. So the first would be physical and psychological safety. So I think that one's pretty easy to understand, and it's definitely one of the most fundamental for programs. So if young people feel afraid of bodily harm or not able to open up emotionally within the program, they're less likely to want to be there. That's basically the extent of that. So it's very important and one of the foundational aspects of all youth programs. The second one there is supportive relationships. So this is something that, as Kent mentioned very early on, we're taking a deeper dive into in terms of our research direction, which we call developmental relationships. So this is just one measure of those, and within this, we want to look at relationships with youth, with their staff at the programs, as well as youth-to-youth or peer-to-peer relationships as well, which we also find to be just as important. The third one here is opportunities to feel a sense of belonging and being valued. And I just realized that I grouped physical and psychological safety and security with structure, so I want to touch on structure as well. Structure is something that's important, and specifically when working with different populations, structure can look quite a bit different. So if you're in the elementary school space working with K through 5 grade youth, that could look a little bit different than what an appropriate structure would be for those in the middle years or in high school. So the expectations for behavior will also be different. I think as they age, we'd all agree that we should have increasing opportunities for them to be involved in making decisions, as well as potentially in leadership roles within the program. So sorry to jump around there, but going back to sense of belonging and being valued, that would be our 4th category there. The 5th one, the opportunity to develop positive social values and norms. And then also we look at opportunities for skill building and mastery. So what are they getting out of the program? And support for efficacy and mattering. So that we define as opportunities to develop confidence in one's abilities to master one's environment, so a sense of personal efficacy. And then also opportunities to make a contribution to one's community and develop a sense of mattering. The final one there is looking at the program's ability to connect their work with the families of the youth as well as with the schools and with broader community resources. So we've worked with a number of programs that are part of a network of youth-serving organizations. So having that strong link there can help in a number of ways, one being that you have the ability to then talk about what's worked in your program and share that information with others and kind of experiment a little bit to see, what are the best approaches? Are youth going to more than one program? What can I do to complement that? So that type of thing is something we'd like to look at. So the survey data that you see is from the pilot survey. So when we are measuring with this instrument, we're going to be looking at a couple of different things. We want to look at the means of each of these items, so each of the 8, but then also the distribution, which is a little bit more telling in some ways as the means tend to mask what's really going on. So what you're seeing here are actually 4 different bars, so they're quartiles for each category, and starting from left to right, red would be an area that definitely needs to be worked on, whereas green would be the percentage of youth that view that as a very powerful strength of that program. So in this case, from the pilot data, we see that a good majority of youth, 57% and 21%, so over 3/4 of youth feel that their programs have a high level of psychological and physical safety, which, as I mentioned, is very foundational. Structure, again, is also important and scores to be right around the same. So both of those are very foundational. Our work, of course, is going to branch a little bit more deeper into relationships, so we hope to increase that within programs through some other resources, but this instrument will at least give you a sense from the perspective of, from the youth, of these qualities that are deemed to be important for measuring program quality. All right, and I think that next we're actually going to do a third poll that Samantha can bring up here.
Yeah, I just launched our third poll. So talking a little bit about the survey elements Justin just went through. And the question is, which one of the following elements of a high-quality program is the most important to you? The options are ensuring safety and structure, building relationships, building social values, providing opportunities for skill building, connections to families and community resources. Those are the 5 options. Looks like almost half of you have taken a chance to vote. I'll leave it open for a little bit longer. It's obviously a very tough question because they're all important elements. It looks like 70% or so have voted, so I'm going to close it right now in a few seconds. So you haven't had a chance. If you're going between 1 or 2, pick one, and I will share the results now. Thank you all for voting. So it appears that 18% of you said ensuring safety and structure, 44% said building relationships, 8% building social values, 19% providing opportunities for skill building, and 11% connections to families and community resources. So, and I have a few people talking about how it was a very tough choice, so we agree. Thank you so much for participating. I will hide the poll now.
Great. All right, so as part of the Youth and Program Strengths Survey, I covered one component of it, which would be what we deem to be the program quality piece. The other section really focuses on what we call the developmental assets framework. So while many different organizations provide youth programs and their approach can be very unique, a key recommendation from the committee that I mentioned earlier was that youth programs should be based on a framework that supports the growth of key social-emotional skills or character skills. The developmental assets are one such framework. So within the developmental assets framework, which is now 25 years old but relevant to many youth programs today, we measure what we call external support. So looking at what we can provide to youth as adults in terms of relationship support, empowerment is also part of that. And then also what we look at are internal skills or internal strengths. So that would be the second half of the developmental assets frame. And those really align nicely with what most refer to as social-emotional skills or character skills. So as part of the Youth and Program Strengths Survey, there's actually another instrument complete, which is the Developmental Assets Profile. So the slide that you're seeing right here is just a quick board of sorts. So you'll see that we measure all that scores, and then what I had mentioned, which are the external assets and internal assets provided. But then also look at 8 categories actionable piece. So the top 4 there, from support, empowerment, boundaries, and expectations areas that we look at within this instrument. The bottom 4, commitment to learning, positive values, social competencies, and positive identity, are the 4 internal strengths that we look at within the same instrument. So we also mention 5 context areas, and those are really a different lens at which you can look at these data. So for example, looking at it from a family perspective might show you how youth are experiencing the assets framework within their families. What we're trying to do with the program quality piece is be able to provide a more detailed lens for programs to look at these data. So the overall goal really of developing and offering this survey, the YAPs survey as a tool, was to provide high-quality data to programs to help monitor their impact and the quality of their approach, all while incorporating youth voice into the process. And one other unique thing that we want to be able to offer, and we do with this instrument, is the measure of dosage. So looking at the frequency that youth are attending these programs, and then looking at how they respond or how they scored on certain program quality indicators. So looking at youth from the perspective of those that are attending the most often to those that are attending the least often, and whether or not those scores differ as well.
So Justin, can I ask a quick question about this survey, and then we want to get to the other Justin and some questions. Am I correct that if somebody gives this survey, and we don't mean this to seem like a big question commercial for this survey, we're trying to give an example here. This is more like a case study. Those are the mean scores, but they would also get the kind of quartiles or quintiles that we saw in the last slide, right?
Yep, definitely. So with our survey reports, we definitely want to provide these means. And as I mentioned, they tend to mask a little bit of what's going on. So we definitely want to also provide the distribution, especially a histogram, so showing how many youth were at each score level, which we think is a little bit more telling at times.
Yeah, I would say it often is. And so the reason I wanted to jump in with this is it looks like a lot of you are giving some kind of a quantitative measure, either a homegrown or one that you're potentially using from an organization like ours. And I am not a big fan of means for actually actionable data. Once in a while you get something that's really troubling or really exciting with means, but you should always be seeking instruments that give you some data on the distribution. And I think a lot of us have probably lived this journey. Then you can start to have a discussion, well, who are those kids down there in that 6% that's red? Or what is happening in that 52% that's green? And so look for that kind of a representation of data in whatever instruments you are considering.
All right, so now I'm just going to touch on some of the quick survey basics here. So this tool was something that we developed for primarily middle and high school aged youth, so grades 6 through 12. We built it into an online platform. We do have the option for programs that do wish to use it on paper. They can do so. We have a process for that, but primarily it would be an online-based tool, usable on tablets, computers, as long as they have access to a browser. It's relatively quick, so it's about a 15-minute instrument. Most of the older youth will take less time than that. We try to keep it at that level. It's also something that's very affordable for most youth programs that are using it. So the cost, just to mention it here, to set up an account, which is a one-time fee, it would be $150. So for those of you who may use some of our other instruments, you'll notice that it's very similar to that. The only other cost would be a $1 per survey use. So if you're using it as a pre and a post assessment or as a one-time assessment, it's a $1 per youth participant, and that covers the cost of the reporting as well. So it's all built into that. We also feel that it's high quality, so we did a lot of work and partnered with a number of organizations to pilot it and ensure that the data was usable, the data was reliable, the data was valid. Part of the strength of it is that it's built on a tool, the developmental assets profile, that's been used in thousands of settings with about 750,000 youth across the United States and around the world. So we know that that instrument is strong and that many have found value in it. We just hope that this addition of program quality measures can strengthen its usefulness for the out-of-school time world. So that's the goal. I also want to mention that the reports, within those, as we've been talking about, we're going to measure each of those categories. We'll look at means, we'll look at distribution. We also want to break the data down by dosage, as well as certain demographic categories. Of course, gender, race, ethnicity, and grade would be the three biggest that we would look at. So there's quite a bit there. Reports, we try to make them as user-friendly as possible, and I think based on feedback that we've received, we've definitely achieved that goal. So if you have any interest in seeing what a report looks like and want to talk about that, definitely reach out to me. You'll have my contact information. Yeah, so that, in a nutshell, is the Youth and Program Strength Survey. Now we're going to bring in someone who was great enough to help us pilot it, Pastor Justin Boeding.
Thank you, Justin, for the opportunity to be here. I was introduced to search. In fact, the congregation I served was introduced to search through an institute, or through Every Hand Joined. It's a cradle to career. Success is our term. It's a community-wide initiative focused on the development of young people. We were asked to be one of the 12 pilot programs because the question that was posed again and again is, do after-school programs make a difference in the lives of young people? As one who works with young people, as many of you do, instinctively, I think the answer to that is yes, but did we have any sort of data that would back this up? So these 12 pilot programs ranging from youth and government to athletics, my congregation was asked to be the faith component of this. I lead a confirmation program of about 45 young people, 8th and 9th graders, who took this DAP in early fall. The results were, to say the least, fascinating. When we were able to look at the distribution of scores, we found that about a third of our kids scored in that thriving category. Most of the rest were in the successful or above average category. What was very disturbing, however, is that we had about 10% who were in that challenge or at-risk category. Because of the size of our program, about 45 kids, again, it was pretty easy for me to identify, okay, who are these kids and what's going on in their lives. What we did as a group then is we sat down and we talked about what is the difference, what can we do as a confirmation program to move these numbers. Obviously, some of these kids are positioned for success, frankly, whether they participate in our after-school program, in our confirmation program or not. But what about these other kids, specifically the ones who are at risk? One of the things that we noticed is very few of them, again, in this at-risk category, have a number of adults that they would count as meaningful, supportive people in their lives. So how our confirmation program has evolved is that we've taken what was our normal program, which was about an hour and a half, large group to small group model, where we have a presentation led by one of the pastors, followed by about a 45-minute group with small groups of 6 to 7 young people with one adult. We've changed that. So now we've added a second adult to those small groups. More importantly, once a month, instead of doing small groups, we have gone to the congregation and basically recruited 45 grandparents, 45 people from the congregation who sit down with these young people once a month, have conversations as simple as how's life and how's life at school, what's going on in your life, and it's give and take. And so we often ask kids. So, for instance, young people tell what they did over Christmas break. Their grandparent figures, those mentors, talked about what they used to do over Christmas break. It sounds very small, but it's actually been, dare I say, life-changing for a couple of those kids, again, who would be in the at-risk category. Just to have an adult that they can come and they can share these things with on a regular basis. We also noticed that through the results, many of our kids in all categories wanted to have, I think the word Jenna used was empowered. They want to know that their voice makes a difference, that their actions make a difference. And so instead of just having conversation 3 nights a month with their small groups, once a month those kids are invited, again with their adults, to go out and participate in some sort of mission opportunity. The most common one has been going to a local food shelf to help there. The last thing I would say, there's been a number of strengths of using this DAP for us, but the last thing that has helped me tremendously is there was something of a disconnect between, perhaps to say, hopefully it's okay to say, our older members of our congregation and our young people. The older members of the congregation had a perception of the lives of young people that was not accurate. And so I was able to go and not only be able to tell stories about these young people, but to say, here's the data. Here's how they view themselves. Here's how they view the number of adults they have in their lives. And that, frankly, has been incredibly helpful for me, because it has empowered our congregation to say, oh, wait, I guess this is really important. There are needs that we did not know about. And so, by all means, Pastor, how can I help out? And so, in terms of recruiting volunteers, this has been essential and incredibly helpful for us.
That's fantastic. And, just one quick point of nomenclature. You may have noticed Pastor Boeding mentioned the DAP. So for those of you who know Search Institute, we're at least I am prone to acronyms, which somebody stop me before I create another one. So the DAP is the Developmental Assets Profile, which is a Search Institute survey that has been administered in more than 30 countries around the world. 500,000 kids have taken it. That is included in the YAPs. So you get the DAP with the YAPs, and that's where that piece kind of comes in. You know, let me just, I know we're going to open up to questions and comments that you may have here pretty soon, but we have one more, I think, shot. Yeah, great.
Yeah, so I'm going to just kind of, I guess, maybe wrap up the formal part and thank you for, it's so fun to hear a story come to life about process works. And that's all I kind of want to reiterate. It's just that, you know, using this youth and program strength survey, it really draws on all the things we're talking about with positive youth voice. And young people can be part of this process from the beginning to the end, and then back again, frankly. So I think part of it, I'm just going to go through this quickly. You can introduce it to the young people. Let them know that this is actually going to be important, that their opinions are going to be integral and that it's going to matter as part of this process. Have them help you administer the survey. Have young people hand out the survey to other young people. Invite their ownership by doing that. Spend some time analyzing the data together. Sit down, discuss the results with youth, and what do those results mean for your organization? That's kind of sometimes in research speak we say it's the what and the so what once you get the data. And then finally, the now what is really taking some time to think about how you might strengthen your program based on what you find out from the survey together.
Yeah, and the example of in Red Wing where you increased the relational component of the program is, you know, a very tangible program. Obviously, many of you are working in contexts that would be very different from a faith-based organization, and part of the way we've tried to design this survey, and this should be true of any survey that you might consider using, is that it is relevant for your context. And so a really important thing to consider.
Yeah, I was just going to add one quick thing. We've been doing some work in the Quad Cities right now with young people with 10 different youth-serving organizations. And so what we did with these youth-serving organizations is we actually asked them about youth voice. We said, what do you want a voice about and why is it important? I'll go back there. And so through this process, we gathered all these young people together after we'd kind of gotten this data. And so they actually got into small groups, and they did a real actionable process. They said, you know, what can we do to strengthen youth voice in our organization? And they took a bunch of Post-its and sticky balls and kind of got all the youth and adult ideas up there, and they kind of gathered them into clusters and themes. And each group came up with 3 actionable strategies that they could use to really bring that youth voice to the forefront. And then we actually got all those 10 groups together in one room and said, okay, now across the community, what could you all do that you can't do on your own in these organizations? So I think there's kind of some interesting opportunity. I mean, there's definitely an opportunity to make this fun. To when you get your data back, you can have a pizza party, or you can have a retreat, or make the young people feel special and welcome and involved in the whole thing. But also, there could be really interesting opportunities if other youth-serving organizations around you are also taking the survey to talk amongst each other, to say, what did you guys do to strengthen youth voice, or whatever it was that you decided you wanted to work on in your group. And maybe there's things you can do across organizations that you can't do on your own.
Thanks, Jenna. With the time we have, Sam, do we have some questions that are there that you want to, that we can highlight? We can come back to this workshops and stuff at the end.
Yeah, we've had several questions come in. We actually had 3 separate questions about tools appropriate for K-5 programs.
Yeah, right now the program quality piece is really built for those that are older than that population. The developmental assets profile without the program quality measures, we do have a version of that can be used with late elementary school youth, which would be grades 4 and 5. So it only covers the higher end of that range, but it is one way to at least engage them within with the developmental assets profile and hopefully incorporate youth voice into your work. I think that a lot of our work would suggest that a qualitative approach and observational for a younger group would be sufficient. It can be tricky or difficult to have a K through 3rd grade youth use a survey instrument Their reading levels can be across the board, so it's definitely an area where usually a parent report is something that's done if a survey tool is used. And of course, there's pros and cons to that, as parents aren't always fully involved within the program. So I think that some type of qualitative approach for the younger population, and then a quantitative and mixed methods approach for the 4th and 5th grade would be appropriate.
You know, there's a reason that we call this webinar Just Ask Them, and it really does come down to the fact that even as you are, struggling with high aspirations for what you want to achieve with kids, and then constraints of budget and time and other things like that, don't let youth voice, even with little kids who you can't give surveys to, fall off your to-do list. And you can get very actionable data that's qualitative from asking them. I think the key 2 points, 2 simple rules of thumb would be make sure you ask them at the right time. So don't throw it in as a question at the end of the session as everybody's leaving, or right before they go to play on the playground or something. And then the second would be don't ask leading questions. Isn't this fun? Sounds obvious, but it's really easy to do, especially with little kids. So make sure you set up the opportunity to be engaging those kids in thinking about how they feel when they come here. That's a really good opening to pose. When I say the name of this program, what do you think of? Those are things that actually might start to paint a picture for you. The other thing is if they say some stuff that you don't love, don't communicate verbally or non-verbally that you're concerned about it.
Good advice. Teresa has a few more questions about the YAPs, and she's wondering, will the data sets be available for organizations to do local analysis? So you do the YAPs in your community, will they have the data sets?
Yeah, I think that that's definitely something we can provide. Typically, when you are taking that approach, your process for implementation might be a bit different because you could see individual data. So you might want to get active consent, but that's something that I can touch on off of this webinar, of course. But just keep that in mind. But the short answer is yes, we can provide the individual scored or raw data.
So Justin just said a term. Again, I'm assuming that you all are, many of you are doing some kind of survey out there, but there's 2 food groups here. There's active and passive consent. I guess there's a third, which is no consent. But it really comes down to, do you need to ask parents or parenting adults if you can give this survey to the kid, or and do you just assume it's passive because you give them the option to say no, I don't want them to, but you don't ask them to actually affirmatively say yes, they can do it? Or do you need active consent, where they actually say yes, my son or daughter can do it? We find as long as the data individually is not going to be identifiable, passive consent, most families are very comfortable with it. I think you can also, as long as they have faith in what you're going to do with the data, and I think Pastor Boeding's example of, yeah, he was able to identify some individual kids, but they didn't shame them, they supported them. You can work through the challenge of consent as well. Don't let that be a roadblock to your finding ways to get this done.
Right, and I'll add one note that the YAPs survey is a very low-risk instrument, so we're not asking risk behavior questions or anything of that sort. So it's definitely what we would call strength-based in its approach. So typically passive consent would definitely be sufficient.
We actually had a question about that, so thanks for bringing up the fact that this doesn't address risk behaviors, so that's not one of those concerns. A question from Lorraine. She says, we are a public library with an informal after-school program. Does the YAPs work with a more fluid program without consistent members?
You know, I would say absolutely. The data that you're going to get from it, though, needs to be put in that context. You need to make really sure that you don't sort of say this is our representative indication of our program, because if your program is kind of a drop-by program, and I've seen amazing, in the urban school district where I used to work, our libraries in that community were jam-packed with the kids that we were desperately trying to reach, and those librarians did an awesome job. My favorite one they called the Swamp, and that place had all my students in it. It was great. The data you're going to get on program quality there in particular, it can be incredibly valuable, but you need to realize that it's very individualized. It's the experience of that kid on that day, as opposed to a program where kids are doing a more structured, everybody does this at one time. The half of the DAPS that is on the internal strengths and external supports, what we call the developmental assets, is incredibly useful in that context as well. I would say maybe even especially because you often don't have the time in those more fluid settings to do some kind of structured activity where you find out everybody's hopes for the future. And this data can give you a sense of those critical things in a pretty efficient way.
Right, and I'll also add that one thing that we definitely want to make sure we're providing is a level of analysis based on the dosage, so looking at how often youth are coming into the program. So hopefully for those of you that are perhaps not as structured or youth are coming in at random intervals, you'll be able to still get a sense of youth that are popping in more, what are they saying about program quality versus those that may attend once a month, for example.
I'll just say, having been somebody who probably, like many of you, has to raise money to do programs, in most, I'm sure not all settings, you'll find that your young people who come more often have much more favorable responses and better outcomes than those who come episodically, and you can share that with your funders and say, look, when they come a lot, all these good things happen. Now there is this question of causation and correlation that we get paid to think about. Are the kids who come a lot very supported in their lives in general? So it may not exactly be our program, but that can be a very, very helpful data point as you're looking to show to people, including, like Pastor Boeding said, a congregation where you're trying to energize in volunteering. You're not asking permission to do this. You're asking your engagement. It's a way of saying, whoa, when we do this, it works, to the extent that kids' perceptions are an indicator that it works.
Kimberly wants to know, could the YAPs be used across a variety of programs? We have a community-wide OST network. It would be great if we were able to collect in a central location measurements from each of the different agencies and organizations with the programs they run.
Yeah, certainly. We've partnered with a number of networks of that sort, and their approach can be a little bit different. So some may administer a tool at each separate entity, so at each participating program, and then come together to share their results, their findings, and have an open dialogue around ways to improve their methods. Another approach we've seen is to partner with the schools, for example, which the youth may attend, and then disaggregate the data from that to the separate programs. So to do that, we would need to know, which programs are in the network, and divide it out in that manner. So we've definitely seen its usefulness, especially when you're engaging with the other organizations as part of the network, because the dialogue can be that much richer, because what works in one program may be something that you hadn't really thought of or tried in your program. So to be able to share that knowledge is quite powerful.
Just to give you an example of that, in Red Wing, what we do now is, I just had a conversation with Hispanic Outreach, Youth and Government through the YMCA, our congregation, and then the athletic director, talking about how are we utilizing the information that we have received. It's been encouraging. It's also, frankly, it's stretching because we have so many things to learn from one another. The willingness to say, hey, we've made some strides. Now, what do we need to do to take the next step for the sake of our young people? But yes, the conversation across different groups has been very, very helpful.
And we think it's fantastic. It's hard to overstate the power of a common language, and developing a common language when you're all looking at similar data. The one flip side I would say, just make very explicit as you're looking at data across programs that this data is not, it should not be seen as simplistically reflective of good program, bad program. Because there is program quality data here. So if the kids are, for instance, saying, I feel less safe here than I do there, on one hand, it may mean that one of those programs needs to do some hard thinking about why kids may not feel as safe. It also may be that those kids generally don't feel as safe in their lives anywhere. And so the cross-program use of instruments like this is frankly awesome, and it just needs to be explicitly described for what it is and what it isn't.
Okay. Mindy asked if the YAPs is just a one-time quantitative survey, or is there a qualitative component as well?
Yeah, right now, the tool itself would be considered quantitative, but as part of the report that we provide, we would definitely provide some questions and kind of next steps, so ways that you can engage stakeholders, whether they're other staff members or the youth participants themselves. So that would be one way to add a qualitative method into this work. And as Kent mentioned, with the example of safety within the program, it would be important, of course, to follow up with youth to really determine what is the root of the reason why that may be lower in that program. The survey itself isn't going to provide the exact reason, so being able to start that dialogue with youth and staff to really get to the bottom of it is important and definitely part of the report after the fact.
So let me actually, and I know we're bumping up against our time here, on your screen you see a couple of opportunities for workshops, and this ties to the question that the individual asked about, is there a qualitative way to do this? We're in the midst of a big transition at Search Institute, building on our 50-year history, but we really, in a nutshell, are working to become not an organization that studies stuff and then puts out resources and hopes somebody does good things with them, as has often happened, but actually that partners with organizations to achieve good things for kids. So this survey is one of the first new efforts that we have, that we're releasing to move in that direction. And in fact, we will be, in the future, offering qualitative services through which either someone from Search Institute or perhaps more realistically financially, your staff use a qualitative process that we would help you learn and design to capture youth voice. So that's in the future, and it's something we're really excited about doing. The other point would be we are rolling out 2 new workshops that are tied to this idea of youth voice in general and youth voice tied to out-of-school time program quality in particular. The first is a general workshop that is going to be focused on how you increase quality in out-of-school time by using youth voice and digging deep into that National Research Council framework, which, as Justin mentioned, is a decade old but still holds up awfully well. The second is a workshop that is for organizations that give the Youth and Program Strength Survey a facilitated effort to help individuals dig into that data, understand the research behind these measures, and think about strategies for building on those youth and program strengths. And both of those workshops will be such that you can come, 1 or 2 or 3 of you from a program, to a workshop with people from multiple organizations around the country. That's what we're calling open enrollment workshops. Or we frequently send colleagues out to do a workshop that is for one particular organization or perhaps consortium of organizations. So those are opportunities in the very near future that are going to be available. But I think even for those of you who may not have the need or the desire to use the particular tool we've spent a ton of time talking about today, the Youth and Program Strength Survey, our big hope is that you will continue what it sounds like are some pretty robust efforts already to engage young people in helping you think about program quality and ways to meet their needs in the future.